Thanks so much for watching our show. We really appreciate the support. It costs a lot to produce, so we're asking for donations and pledges here on Patreon. Thanks again. Hey, welcome to See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett, and I'm Dr. Brett, and I'm back with Jamal Hayes, who often is behind the camera with his producing and editing, but sometimes he's in front of the camera, and we're going to go back and forth here with some questions, and we'll see how we can make it this interactive. So you start this time, and then I'll go from there.
So I start. Oh man. Well, this COVID stuff.
We're just gonna go right in.
If I can just jump right in.
Yeah, please.
Don't beat around the bush.
It's been a year, right? You and I have been together for 9 months here with this process, but this COVID thing is almost a year, right?
Yep.
Roughly a little more when the shutdown started here in Florida.
Today is the 20th. March 20th, so that would mean about last week this year.
Yes, March 15th, I believe.
We started with the lockdowns. Or this week, yeah.
We actually made some good friends here on the island in the lockdown. We had our own little group of 6 or something, the same, the same people that would meet and watch the sunsets. And we're now a year later, we're all COVID friends probably for life, right? Because we would watch those sunsets and they're addictive,
Do you think we're going to be in lockdowns and masks?
No,
stuff for life?
I've been saying now, almost for a year, right? I think these, so-called pandemics run 18 months roughly, 18 months to 2 years in history.
That's a historical thing, 18 months?
18. And I think they burn through the population, so whether you have vaccines or not, I think they run their course because, from the beginning, more people have probably been exposed to this than the numbers say, because we haven't had the, enough testing in place to.
I probably had it last year, February, before anyone was even talking about COVID.
Did you have a bad cough and everything?
Yeah, I had a couple days where I had a fever in February last year, before anyone was talking about COVID. So I never got COVID. I never got sick, so I assume I'm.
Well, you maybe did have COVID, right? Because I've met dozens of people now, who swear last January, February, or March, they already had COVID because they had some kind of heavy cough they couldn't get rid of or whatever it was.
So I probably already have the antibodies.
And we had a mutual guest here just a few days ago. And, Greg James, who was on the show months ago, and he was convinced that he had it a year ago and that most people have been exposed to it. So, I think it's way more prevalent. I think the CDC did come out, or the WHO did come out and say that somewhere, but it seems to have gotten buried, that the actual exposure rate is probably 10 times whatever the case rate is.
Do you think the real numbers will come out, saying, not about 10% of the people that died actually died, or anything like that? Or do you think the media is just going to play on the...
I think, it's a tricky dynamic, right? I mean, I think it's super tricky, in terms of what the incentives are, right? Because we know that some, in hospitals, right, there's been an incentive to report, if an 80-year-old dies, then if you report that they died of COVID, then they're going to get 15 or 30,000 or whatever it is additional money from the federal government or state government.
Are these bot numbers?
No, I don't know. I'm just saying that it's hard to know what's really going to happen, because I think you, like anything else in life, you follow incentives, right? So is there an incentive by the government to tell the truth? I don't know. Is there an incentive by the state? Is there an incentive by the hospital? It depends to me.
What about people? What about kids, schools? What about businesses that are closed and families that are struggling? To me, that's the incentive.
Well, I mean, that's why even a year ago, I was talking about we did a video. Remember, I did a 14-minute video. He filmed it. It was 14 minutes long. And I was talking, in a very passionate way about the emotional, the psychological, the mental, and the spiritual side effects of this virus and pandemic,
Way more
not
than getting
just
sick.
the
Yeah.
not just the physical ones. We know, the people that don't think it's real, I think that's problematic because I know people that have died from it. Although the people that I know did have underlying disorders that were significant. So I think that it has exposed,
For sure.
vulnerability.
For
Yeah.
sure. And I just think it's not as contagious or as deadly as they want you to believe. And it's just kind of hype and fear and,
Oh, I think for sure we're going to find out that, we will find out that at least when I was doing the math here in Florida, you basically, if you, like a couple weeks ago on a Monday, I was frustrated because people think we're dying down here, right?
oh
From
yeah,
the tri-state
I
area.
get
And it's
calls all the
just,
time.
yeah, it's just not true. And our death rate is 0.001. And, which is 1 in 1,000 people that have had COVID have died from it here in Florida. And in Connecticut and in New York, it's 0.002, so 2 in 1,000. So they have double the death rate, and our case rate. And if you do the math, basically, you can figure out that our case rate is 0.09%, 9 people in 100. And then New York was 0.08 and Connecticut was 0.07, and so the case rates are similar, even though we've been more open, not completely, right? And the death rate is half. And then, medical doctors and stuff will come on and say, well, if we didn't protect New York or Connecticut the way, then it would have been triple or quadruple that or something. Maybe that's accurate.
We don't know, right?
But,
You can't say.
But I do, and they would say that Florida, it's an elderly population, people are less likely to go out. All of that's probably true, right?
More likely. Less likely to go out in public. Okay.
Right, so the elderly are
But
safer.
they're more likely they're not safer though, because they're more at risk. So, I don't know.
I mean, we've seen a pretty heavy bar scene locally. Where
elderly people go out all the time.
Yeah, and I've seen lots of restaurants where, like, it's pretty crowded. Like, okay, so you have to wear a mask to get to your table, but the tables are pretty close to each other, and it's very crowded.
I
And
can't
we've
get
seen
over.
that. Yeah.
My grandma's 85. She went to church twice. So like people are gathering. Like,
Oh yeah, no. I mean, the other day I was with somebody here locally that said it's over here. Oh, the guy I golfed with the other day, he said it's over. Here it's not,
Oh, it's
obviously, but in terms of the
seems
way
like it is. I go out and I see people just out and about and
Yeah.
in the streets at
Yeah.
restaurants. Restaurants are full.
Yeah. Well, my
It
guess
feels like it's over.
my guess is that a huge percentage of the population's already been exposed, and a lot of people had it didn't know it, like what we're referring to. But in terms of the fear and control components of it, I've been pretty critical about, like, just how much fear there is, because fear doesn't have any value, right?
It's the
If
opposite.
anything, it suppresses
worse
your
for-
immune
right,
function, right?
Definitely.
So to stay out of fear, I think, is primary. And then the thing about the outside and wearing masks outside, one of the things I've said for a year now is, if you could just get this virus by touching something or, passing a stranger, 4 billion people would have it, not, supposedly,
Right,
20 million or whatever it is around the world,
Right.
right? So I don't think it's so simple. I think, a lot of exposures inside in close proximity with poor ventilation. That's what my guess is, right? Based on, hundreds of conversations, like, hundreds, like, and a lot of doctor friends and so on, right?
So predictions for when you can go out without a mask?
Like Texas already, abolished the mask mandate. So I think
Is that
Florida.
good? That's a good thing.
I mean, certainly, outside, I think, is for the most part silly. Remember, Black Lives Matter didn't create some huge spike, right?
No.
And people were yelling and screaming in close proximity outside. So I think, outside is limited. I think I read some study 6 months ago or something that, I haven't seen it publicized, but something about how they tested like 5 or 10,000 people outside in Wuhan, China, the sort of origin of this whole thing, supposedly. and like one person got it outside out of like 10,000 or
Oh,
something.
wow.
I don't have the exact stat on that. We can look it up,
How do
but
you test that?
but yeah, I don't know how you exact, but it wouldn't surprise me is what I'm getting at. Like, I think that, the outside exposure thing is probably pretty minimal, right? Now we're not talking about spring break and partying, because these college kids are definitely
1,000 kids in one little pool.
yeah, they're definitely getting it. I had an athlete I coach, and he got it on spring break or whatever.
On spring break, okay.
Yeah, and that's because they're not just partying in a pool; they're going to bars every night, right? And they're swapping drinks and
Oh,
whatever,
man.
spit, whatever.
Smoking joints.
Yeah, exactly. So I think
College kids.
and some colleges, because I'm coaching a lot of college kids, some of them have been in, on and off lockdowns, or very strict environments, a lot of testing depending on the school.
Oh yeah, like one person has a symptom, then everyone has to go get tested, or
Yeah.
everyone has to quarantine for
Yeah.
2 weeks, or
Yeah,
That's
and I think that, like, from what I've seen and what I've read, I think that 14-day quarantines are pretty harsh and probably totally unnecessary in most of the cases, right? Someone had limited exposure, had a negative test, and they're forced to quarantine for 14 days. I've seen that personally dozens of times,
that's a shame.
right? Limited exposure, a negative test, and yet they're still forced to quarantine for 2 weeks, not even 10 days, right? So it's
what's
like,
up with that? Why are
those
people
are
accepting that?
rules in
Like,
school.
who accepts these rules? Who makes these rules? Like,
I mean, institutions make
is there
them.
any doctors behind this? If they came back with a negative test, why quarantine?
They've got certain protocols in place depending on the college or university, right? So some of them need 2 negative tests or whatever they need, right? Because there are false positives, there's false negatives. I mean, this thing is
Are those are these policies put into place by doctors though? That's what I don't get.
at the
I feel like
universities.
people-
I mean, I don't know. It's a good question. They probably are, but you can find. It doesn't matter what the stat. You can find a doctor to support your thesis or a doctor to not support it, right? I mean, you can find. So if you want to have a policy, then you find doctors that'll support that policy. If you want a different policy, it's like the media and the narratives, right? You have a certain
just choose your
narrative, you find
Republican or
people.
Democrat, you find your news, you find your
Yeah,
doctor.
you find your people that are going to support your narrative, right?
That's how they're teaching science these days.
I mean, I hope not, but that occurs,
Yeah,
right?
for sure. 100%.
If we want to make an argument, right? I've watched a fair amount of CNBC or Bloomberg over the years, but CNBC in particular, right? Is it seems like, and my brother's, Wall Street, and he's been very critical of this at times, but, when the market's falling, they get all the negative guys on there, right? To say how doomsday is coming. When the market's going up, then they get all the bulls on there, saying how it's going up forever. And it sort of seems like that, one day this supports the narrative, the next this supports the narrative, right? You can always find people that'll support your narrative more or less, depending on what your thesis is. And in theory, science shouldn't be like that, right? It should be.
Well, in theory, all of this is theoretical. That's why I'm asking these questions, because there's only very few things that are scientifically proven as law. Everything else in real science is up for debate. And I just think back to the first guy that said you have to wash your hands before doing surgery, and he did it, and his surgeries had less infections and stuff like that, but other doctors said he's crazy. Yeah. And that was before the microscope, and then the microscope came along, and then they're like, oh, he's right. But I see that herd mentality, so people just want to jump on whatever's new, jump on as an attack. They attack whatever's new, attack the new ideology. Even if it is true, like the germ theory, which that's also still debated.
Well, remember I was telling you about how we just ran into a nurse locally here, and she was shocked because she got the vaccine, and she wasn't planning on doing that, in part because, you don't know what the side effect profile will be for several years, probably 3 or 4 minimum. And she only did it because she's taking care of someone elderly and, needed to minimize the risk exposure. But she was pretty shocked because she's aware that, that we can't prove they're safe, we can't say they're unsafe, but we can't prove they're safe until 3 or 4 years from now when we see the full side effect profile.
So you can't say either. You can't say it's unsafe or safe. They want to convince you it's safe because they're selling hundreds of millions of vaccines.
Yeah, but you can't prove it's safe, we're not going to know. So I make this joke that, in 3 or 4 years, we're probably going to see some, a 30-year, and one of them is going to be green or something. And it's really my playful way. It's my playful way of saying, look, we don't know. So please just at least, I like the truth. I like it when people treat us like adults and, just say, look, we think it's safe and we would like everybody to get vaccinated, but there's no way we're going to know for sure. I would love to, some honesty. Thanks for watching See It and Feel It with Dr. Brett, and stay tuned for part 2 of this interview. Remember to like, subscribe, and share with a friend.